Now, Moscow's decision to end its combat mission in Syria does come on the grim 5th anniversary of the country's conflict. What began as political protests spiralled into a civil war, sparking the world's worst humanitarian crisis in decades and spawning a new global terrorist threat. Western leaders were quick to take sides when the violence first erupted.
Total collapse of any effort by the Assad government to work with their own people. He needs to get out of the way.
The United States and our allies and our partners provide the assistance that the opposition needs to strengthen itself.
إياكم أن تقسى قلوبكم ألينوها لله عز وجل.
Instead of a triumph of democracy and progress, we have violence, poverty, and social disaster. I can't help but ask those who created the situation, do you realize what you've done?
A decade of relentless fighting has claimed the lives of almost 500,000 Syrians. Millions of others have fled their homes, either becoming internally displaced or leaving the country as refugees. Some of the rebels who've been fighting since the start, though, say their movement was hijacked by foreign powers. As RT's war correspondent Lizzie Phelan now reports.
It was here on the other side of this front line with rebel-held Joba where some of those first protests took place. What started as peaceful anti-government demonstrations quickly escalated into an armed uprising, followed by half a decade of war. The area behind me has been reduced to rubble, like most of Syria. Now, in the run-up to this anniversary, we've been speaking to some of those people who took part in those early demonstrations, asking them to look back on how they escalated into this bloody conflict that has caused hundreds of thousands of dead, caused the biggest refugee crisis since World War II, and led to the rise of extremist groups like ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra. In Afrin, we spoke to one of the founders of the 5-year-old Free Syrian Army faction, Jaish al-Thawar. His name is Abu Joma al-Banawi. He said that he regrets taking part in the so-called revolution that he now sees as a conspiracy by foreign powers.
I've changed my mind about the revolution because everybody has contributed to destroying Syria. At the beginning and the end, it's only the people who lose. It's people who suffer. Our people are now refugees. Had we known that Syria's friends would be like this, we wouldn't have stood with them. All our people were forced to flee.
He said that his group is no longer fighting the Syrian government, only Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS, and that once they are defeated, he will lay down arms so that security can return to Syria.
The Syrian crisis, which began in 2011, consisted of two main problems: the absence of political cooperation and also tyranny on the part of security forces, nullifying the civil war. A third problem is the corruption of the Syrian government, which has become systematic. All this led to protests calling for freedom and social justice. Those demonstrations were peaceful. Also, everyone recognizes the prominent geopolitical position of Syria, causing regional powers to seek domination over Syria through internal conflicts and crises. With regards to regional and international intervention, unfortunately, Arabiz was imposed on the Syrian opposition to give a religious character to the Syrian crisis, as well as to keep it on a military path.
Now, there are many who feel like their initial cause was hijacked by people who wanted to capitalize on the chaos in their country. For example, we traveled to Daraa city, the so-called cradle of the uprising, and spoke to people who took part in those very first protests.
At the beginning, I went to the demonstrations for reforms. We thought it was for reforms, but after a while, there was blood, so we left. They used to hold them every day in order to get bigger crowds. But then some of the guys stopped going because they felt something was suspicious, while the others were urging more and more people to come.
We saw people going out shouting for freedom. People wanted to know what is this freedom they are talking about and what's next. So people went out, and among them were people who are ignorant of what is happening. There were people amongst us offering sandwiches, and I asked them, "Why are you offering sandwiches and money? To encourage me to do what?" No one knew. But afterwards, people discovered that there was money paid from outside the country to encourage people to commit sabotage.
Now, with this hard negotiated cessation of hostilities, most people in Syria simply want an end to the bloodshed and for their country to finally rise again from the ruins. In Damascus, I'm Lizzie Phelan for RT.